you can't argue with that being a successful template.
Welcome back to Just Another Football Podcast. To celebrate 200 subscribers on YouTube, there is no podcast. Woohoo! How are you doing, Harry? We haven't spoken in a while. Indeed, since that Arsenal victory over Man City at the Emirates in probably the most boring game of the season to watch. Although, more about the boring point later. But was it that boring in the ground?
It was so boring that it didn't warrant a podcast in reaction to it.
Absolutely.
So quite befitting of what we watched for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't think boring is the right word for someone obviously with a vested interest in it. It was tense, and I think if I watched it in the cold light of day, I would have found it incredibly boring, because you're right, not a lot happened at either end. I mean, it was 0-0 written all over it. That was kind of the sort of game it was. Man City had a couple of chances at the start, and then other than that, there was kind of a whole lot of nothing. I was saying to someone earlier, actually, I think both teams would have quite happily taken a point after about 70 minutes of that game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it was. It was a bit of a stalemate. Both teams, well documented that they tried to do similar things. And I think when you have two teams trying to do similar things with both teams missing players and therefore maybe slightly below their best, I think you end up with a situation where they sort of cancel each other out. That's what happened. And I think it was always going to take a moment of brilliance, a moment of luck. In this instance, it was a moment of luck. And, I mean, very important win. Absolutely thrilled to get something, because it has been a very, very long time since we got anything against Man City. And it's well documented. I mean, last year, had we been able to take something off them in one of those games or draw both, then we would have won the title. And so you don't know when you come to the end of the season, those could be the margins. So yeah, thrilled to get over the line, really.
This video is about Erling Haaland specifically, and the reasons we think he might have been a little bit quieter than usual. I mean, quiet. He scored 8 goals in 8 games or whatever. His rate is still a goal a game, so really quiet is clutching at straws, really. But the fascinating thing about this game specifically, which I think brings it to light, is he was dropping in a lot to because Bernardo Silva was supposed to start number 10, but then he played a 6. He was the deepest of the 3 midfielders, one of them which is Rico Lewis. I felt like Bernardo Silva dropping in forced Haaland to drop in too, and just be nowhere near any sort of danger. He had 0 shots. He had no attempts at all, which is kind of the only thing you expect from an Erling Haaland game. But with this one, I didn't find it boring. I only watched the second half, which I feel like in general discourse was the better half of the two. I didn't find it boring because I just kept thinking to myself, why are they standing so much on the ball? Both sides would get the ball in defense and just step on the ball and wait for 5 seconds, 6 seconds. Why is that happening? And why the hell is Rico Lewis pressing next to Erling Haaland? That's what I kept thinking about, because both managers were doing a very similar thing of, first of all, trying not to bait the press because both are very good transitional teams in terms of just playing through you, and second of all, because both teams' biggest threat comes down the middle, and what both teams try to do is just congest the spaces in terms of getting passes through. That was really all the game had. The fascinating thing about Haaland, though, if we focus on just Haaland specifically, is what makes him quiet. Last season, there was a similar kind of discourse about City starting a little bit slow, but then they won the treble. This season feels a little bit different, though, because the absence of Rodri specifically, and also Kevin De Bruyne in terms of those for Erling Haaland, is very felt. Do you think from watching the Arsenal game, was it more of, I have my answer on this, but was it in your mind kind of a template to how to defend against Man City, or was it really just the case of City missing their most two important players? You could argue.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely helped by that. There's no doubt about it. Missing De Bruyne and Rodri definitely helped our cause. The one thing I would add is we've played Man City 5 times with Erling Haaland, 3 times last season, the Community Shield, and then obviously the game last Sunday. And he's kind of had mixed success against us. So in the 2 games this year and in an FA Cup game last year, he did virtually nothing in all 3 games. He had no shots in the Community Shield. I think only 1 shot in the FA Cup game. But the other 2 games, the 2 league games last season, particularly obviously the game at the Etihad at the end of last season, he was really involved and contributed heavily towards them winning both games, of how direct they played into him. I thought particularly the game at ours, it's the most direct I've ever seen Man City play in terms of how every time we would try and press them, they would just kick it along to Haaland. And I think the interesting thing to note, particularly the 2 games this season, is we've learnt from that game at the Etihad last year, both in terms of actually trying to press Man City, and we've actually sort of stepped off them a little bit this year and kind of waited for them to make the first move. So you talk about them standing on the ball a lot. Last season, I think we'd have been pressing them a lot higher, and they probably would have tried to and been able to play through us a bit more easily. You think of that first goal they score in the game at the Etihad where they won 4-1. We boxed them into a corner, and it's sort of a hopeful, optimistic ball up to Haaland. He rolls holding, he makes it stick, gives it to De Bruyne, they transition, they score a goal. And I think what we've learned from that is you have to block central progression into those 2 players specifically. And so the 2 games this season have been the only 2 games, to my mind, where we've lined up with a conventional back 4 and then what you would class as probably 2 sitting midfielders. So in the Community Shield, it was Partey and it was Declan Rice. And last Sunday, it was Jorginho and it was Declan Rice. I think they had Partey been fit, he would have played. And indeed, he came on for Jorginho for the last 20 minutes. So it wasn't like he came on and we went a bit more attacking. There was a clear onus on trying to be more solid in the middle of the pitch, because that is where Man City ultimately hurt you. You look at their wingers and they're tidy, they keep the ball, but they're not the wingers that they had sort of 4 or 5 years ago where they can beat you 1v1 and they threaten down the sides and they have that kind of verticality. There's a very big focus around keeping the ball and ultimately giving it to their match winners, who are the guys that play central in Haaland and in De Bruyne. And so I think, look, you can't argue they had 4 shots. It's the least they've had under Guardiola. So you can't argue with that being a successful template. I think it is helped by them missing personnel. I mean, every time Man City step on the pitch without Kevin De Bruyne, they are infinitely a worse team. Same can be said of Rodri, although they did defend pretty well in this game. I think the only argument you could make if they have Rodri is perhaps they're able to sort of step on and press a bit more aggressively, because the second that Bernardo and Kovacic were booked and ultimately couldn't then continue to gamble, like they're not defenders, they're just going to try and gamble and try and pinch it, and that's where they threatened in the first sort of 25 minutes of the game. The second they weren't able to do that, then obviously they didn't have success. So Rodri's very good at avoiding yellow cards. He's very good at therefore being able to screen the back 4, take those risks, and ultimately help them press higher and get the ball in transition. And I think that's where Haaland is good, in broken play. I think when you get him against settled defences, he has these games where he's always dangerous because he's Erling Haaland and he gets into great positions. But when he's not scoring and not getting shots off, he's going to offer very little.
He to the point of offering very little, there is something very fascinating. I kind of did some research on the chance creation differences between last season and this season. Kevin De Bruyne has missed every minute since getting injured against Burnley on opening day. And when you compare last season to this season, in terms of just expected assists, just the passes that lead to shots, you measure the value of the shot, and that's the expected assist value. This season, to get anyone from Man City, you would have to go all the way down to Erling Haaland, who is 20th. So Haaland is clearly being hurt by just a lack of service, first of all. But what confuses me is why they don't play Bernardo Silva in the Haaland position on the left-hand side. Because if you watched Bernardo Silva in like the Champions League's late games last season, where he would just like dribble around 3 or 4 of the world's best defenders in one go, like in those games against Real Madrid. Perfect example of that in the 4-0 game. Confused me a little bit why they don't play him there. But also, there's clearly a lack of anyone that can provide him with the service. If you watched a lot of the goals last season, there are a lot of passes that very few defenders see, and then all of a sudden Erling Haaland is on goal. But to me, I also think as long as Kevin De Bruyne is out, this is a really good template from Arsenal. That's what I mean when I said I have like my answer on this. Is I think it's a very good template. I think first of all, your line is not a high line, it's not a low block, it's not nothing like that. It's as high as Haaland. It's as high. It depends on where Haaland is. As soon as you see that, and you say Man City are playing like very directly, and that's true, which is part of the reason why Erling Haaland has loads of expected assists, because he just like those knockdowns, right, or holds the ball up and lays it off to someone. Yeah. But as soon as that ball starts to get played long, or you feel like the opposition is starting to play it, the back four just drops. The structure defensively drops with it. And that way, that zone 14 where Man City is, like the top of the box where Man City are most dangerous, Man City had no presence in that area against Arsenal. And that's where they normally are most dangerous, because as soon as the ball hits Haaland, Saliba just like flattening Haaland to the ground and shrugging him off it, because he had that head start and he could use his energy to body Haaland, rather than, obviously that takes a lot of actual like physicality. That's just like the central defender requiring to have that. But he can use his energy on like shrugging him off rather than sprinting to chase Haaland, like what happened to Holding in the Emirates last season. To me, it's a really good template. A few places down, you find you find Phil Foden, who's having some sort of chance creation, but yeah, they're clearly missing Kevin De Bruyne. But I'll throw this to you. Given the template that we've seen from Arsenal, we haven't seen that yet. From, first of all, pretty much anybody else. Wolves did it to a degree very successfully. But when Kevin De Bruyne comes back, do you think the Arsenal template, like let's say Arsenal City in Manchester, when De Bruyne is playing, do you think it can succeed?
Yeah, I mean, it's got a far better chance of succeeding than what we attempted to do last year. I think that's the important thing to mention, is it's about learning what you can and can't do in those games. And I think if you compare it to last year, there was just too much ego involved in what they went up to Manchester and tried to do, which was, we're going to play our stuff and we're going to play it better than them. And it just wasn't ever going to happen. I think in a game like that, you're playing a team that have been in that situation before, have that degree of pragmatism to sort of recognise, like, yeah, they're energetic, they're trying to press us super high, but they kind of we were faking it a little bit. It was sort of like, it was confidence that wasn't actually backed up by what we were producing at that point in the season, with the personnel we were missing, with the games we started to drop points in, the leads we started to give away. I think if we go up there in, I think it's April,
it's very late on
the return game. So, like, it's a long way away, and obviously both teams could, as you say, you've got to assume no injuries. But I think it's always a big ask to go there and get anything. They are very, very good at home, no doubt about it. And as I said, last weekend, it's probably a 0-0 game, if we're being honest. I think we didn't create loads. That's probably the sort of limiting factor in it. And it's the same with the Community Shield. Like, didn't create a lot, got a goal from a deflection, in added time. Like, that's maybe what you give up, is that kind of swashbuckling attacking play. You give it up for a bit more control and sort of limiting the opposition. But I think in a game like that, you have to accept that it is going to come down to fine margins. You're not just going to batter them off the pitch and sort of scare them your way to victory. You're going to have to be solid. You're going to have to stick in there and ultimately take your chances if and when they come. So I think it is a template. I mean, we can do it. I don't think there's loads of teams in the league that are in a position to pick the back four and two midfielders that we've got the luxury of picking at this moment in time. I think
that's the other part of it, right? You have to be
it's one of those, like,
at carrying out those roles of like recognizing.
It's very, look, we've got one of the best centre backs in the world, one of the best number sixes in the world. Like, these are like fantastic players that obviously then you have to put into a system to ultimately make the most out of them. And in a game like that, they're perfect for the task they're entrusted to do. But I think over the course of the season, Man City, this is the thing, they evolve. This time last year, it was sort of, well, how do they get the best out of Erling Haaland? And it was going with 4 centre-backs. Like, who would have thought that would actually be the way, the template for them to ultimately churn out a treble? They went sort of quite back to basics, for being honest. So, look, who knows what we'll be here talking about in 6 months' time with actually what they're trying to do on the pitch. They'll probably have evolved to something else. But if you assume that what they're doing at the minute is what they're going to be trying to do in 6 months, I think it's as good as you're going to get given the relative quality difference. And that's the truth of it.
I am fascinated to see what teams are going to do from now on. Well, Brighton are the ones that play Man City once the international break is over. They haven't been the greatest defending wise, nor have Man United, which is the following game. And then there's more. It's an easy run for Man City, for being honest. But it will be interesting to see how teams approach them, if they learned anything from Arsenal, because I think this was Arsenal's by far best defensive performance of the season. We consider their start of the season, of course. But we'll see if anyone learned from them. If anyone has the balls, the stones to take something out of the Arsenal textbook. Because it was textbook stuff. Swashbuckling defensive performance. Swashbuckling is a great term.
Great word. Fantastic.
Great word. Let's leave it at that. Have a swashbuckling week, everyone. We'll be back soon with a full podcast next week, all being well. All right. Subscribe to everything down below. Go to the description. And we'll see you next week.